Hello, goblins. It's Chris, Eldritch Pipes. Here we are for the beginning of The Whisperer in Darkness. If you know Lovecraft's stories, Charles Dexter Ward and Whisperer, although they take place in sort of Lovecraft universe, there's no connection between those two tales. And one of the great things this podcast does is it manages to thread a needle through Charles Dexter Ward and Whisper in Darkness, and will probably continue onwards if they go any further. They give it the same kind of treatment. They transplant the events from Vermont to Rendlesham in England, and they mix it with real events from English weird history. I am going to be shaping this prince, certainly for episode 1. We'll see what happens when we get to episode 2. And I'm smoking Acadian Perique from McBaron's HH range. So, here we go with episode 1, but before Whisperer events can begin, if you remember, Kennedy was in a bit of a situation. So we're going to pick up with what happened to her before they continue. Here we go then. Episode 1, Whisperer in Darkness.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hi, you're through to the offices of the Mystery Machine podcast. We're taking a break for the moment, but we'll be checking messages, so please speak after the tone.
Hey, it's me. Sorry to take off without, weird times. Anyway, Ezra and I are in Baghdad. I know, right? But we've tracked down Melody Cartwright. She's here with Barbara Sayers and some other guy who's all covered in bandages. We've been watching them for a couple of days, and they've mostly stayed inside their hotel. But this morning, they headed out in a pickup with all their luggage and a local guide. We think they're headed up to Mosul, to the ruins of Nineveh. We're going to go out after them, but I need you to get me some recording equipment couriered out to Mosul because my machine just gave up the ghost, and I can't find anything reliable here. Call me back on this number as soon as you get this. I'm running out to meet a guide. Ezra wants a word with you, okay? Call me back. I'll be back in an hour.
Mr. Haywood, it's Ezra Wheaton. Delete this message. You lost.
That was the message I received about a month after my friend and fellow presenter Kennedy Fisher disappeared, following the events of the case of Charles Dexter Ward. As the end of the message suggests, Kennedy was not back an hour later. I called and her phone was dead, and it stayed that way. I contacted every hospital and hotel in Baghdad looking for her. I got nowhere. I even called a few contacts I had in the army, and they in turn got in touch with people they knew in Iraq. But there was no trace of Kennedy. Some of them expressed doubts that she had ever even been in Iraq. But whether she had or not, there was no trace of her there now. I then tried to contact Godfrey Tillinghast, the man I believed would have some idea of where Kennedy was or what might have happened to her. But Sir Godfrey too had vanished, and my calls and emails went unanswered. 2 weeks later, the British press reported that Sir Godfrey Tillinghast had died of a stroke whilst on a business trip in Cairo. In Kennedy's absence, I put the podcast on hold. I didn't think I could make this show on my own, and truthfully, I didn't want to.
Aw, that's really sweet. Oh, come on, don't make that face. You can't let people think I just vanished into thin air.
It's a mystery show.
Sure, but I'm right here. What were you going to do? Just spin it out and not let me talk for half the season?
It's just a little showmanship.
I'm not dead.
Okay, fine. So, do you want to tell them what happened?
It's kind of the least dynamic resolution to the story.
I think we want to know.
Okay. Well, I left the hotel to go to meet this guide, like I said on the message, and, I got hit by a kid on a scooter.
This is a scooter as in a motorbike?
Yeah, not like a little kid going along the sidewalk. I stepped out into the street, and I guess I wasn't paying attention, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in hospital.
And you were quite badly hurt.
Oh, yeah. I was out cold for 10 days. I fractured my skull, my leg, my wrist, dislocated my shoulder. So, yeah, hit by a bike. 2 weeks in hospital, and by the time I got back to the hotel, Ezra and Barbara Sayers and Melody Cartwright and the guy with the bandages, all gone. So I headed up to Mosul, which is where we thought they were all going. But no. No sign of them in Mosul, and the trail was stone cold, so...
So that was that. And do you have any theories?
I really don't. I mean, that whole time was pretty crazy. And wherever the truth lies, whether those guys were really into something occult or they just believed they were, I'd like to think we'll get to the bottom of it all one day. You know, maybe one of them will resurface or we'll get a lead, and then maybe we can find out how that story ends. But hey, I have a metal pin in my leg, so at least I have a souvenir.
And now we're back.
On to the next one.
And the next one is looking pretty weird.
I've been getting these strange messages from a guy called Henry Akeley.
If you listen to the case of Charles Dexter Ward, you'll remember Dr. Eleanor Peck, who we talked to during that story because she's a historian and an expert in witchcraft and folklore. A few weeks after Kennedy got back to England, we got this voicemail.
It's Eleanor Peck. Can you give me a call? It's about an old student of mine who claims to have fallen foul of some kind of... Well, I'm not sure what he thought it was. I think this one might be up your street.
So we got Eleanor on the phone, and she said...
A few years ago, I was teaching a course on folklore at Birkbeck, mostly mature students. Henry Akeley was on the course. I have a vague memory of him from then as quite an odd man, mid-60s, quite outspoken, but with some weird ideas. He didn't really come at things from an academic viewpoint. He was more prone to... It's like he was on the course because he thought that these stories of wild men and mermaids and fairies were actually real. You get people like this occasionally, and you have to be polite and indulge the questions and so on. But anyway, one day he didn't come in, and that was that. Never saw him again. Then, about 3 or 4 months ago, I got this letter from him out of the blue.
Eleanor sent us a copy of the letter. It's neatly written in fountain pen, and the letterhead shows an address near the town of Rendlesham in Suffolk. It's dated March 17th, 2019, and the letter reads...
Dear Professor Peck, my name is Henry Akeley, and you may remember me as a student on a folklore course you taught at Birkbeck in 2012. If you do remember me, I doubt I left a very favourable impression. If that is the case, you will not have been the first to form such an opinion of me. But I hope you will take me more seriously now. Since leaving Birkbeck, I have moved back to Suffolk, to Rendlesham Forest, where I grew up. You may recall that my interest in folklore stemmed from the stories I heard in this area in my youth, and specifically the events I witnessed near my home on the 26th of December 1980. I never did believe what they said about that, not the official version nor the wild conspiracy theories. Of course, no one was going to take the word of a junkie, but I know what I saw. And I'm writing to you now because they're back and I can prove it, and I want to prove it to you. They come to my house at night, and lately they've been trying to get in, but my dogs have seen them off thus far. I came home later than usual last night because I'd spent the evening with a friend, and when I got home one of the Alsatians was dead in the front garden and they'd taken his head. But now I have proof because I have a security camera in the porch which I fitted quite recently. The image is too dark to make anything out, but it recorded the sound they make, and I have the recording for you by way of proof that what I've been saying all along is true. I'd like you to come up here to my house to witness these phenomena and to help me to investigate further. I would be very glad of your expertise in this field, despite our differences at Birkbeck, and I'm sure it would be of academic interest to you, and perhaps there might be a book or some such in it. And then he gives his contact details and signs off with kind regards, Henry Akeley.
Honestly, I didn't give it that much thought. I read the letter, noted that Henry was no less crazy than I remembered him being, and I set it aside.
But Henry was persistent. He got hold of Eleanor's mobile number, and he started leaving messages. This one was left on the 12th of April.
Miss Peck, it's Henry Akeley. I'm hoping you got my letter. I imagine you think I'm quite mad, but you must call me. You must see what's going on here. My number is...
And then on the 2nd of May...
It's Henry Akeley again. They come every night now. I've buried 5 dogs so far, and I've made more recordings. I've also picked them up on my radio set. The police don't believe me. Now, please, I just need you to get in touch. My number is...
And then, 2 weeks later...
Now, that was last night. I think the dogs took a chunk out of it. There was blood everywhere this morning, leading onto the road. I thought it was one of them, but then I saw my neighbour at lunchtime, and he was limping, and the dogs wouldn't go near him. And that makes me think it can't just be me. I don't think I can trust anyone anymore. Enemies on all sides. The radio broadcasts are getting more frequent. Look, it's Henry Akeley, please. My number is...
That last message I just thought was... Well, it crossed my mind to call social services. More than crossed my mind, actually, but I didn't want to... it seemed like it would be rude to presume. Anyway, I remembered him talking about his local vicar when he was on my course. This guy, who he always said was an expert in the folklore of the area, and Henry spoke about him like they were friends. So I tracked the vicar down, a man called Will Marth, and spoke to him on the phone. I told him I'd been getting these messages from Henry, and he said Henry had seemed agitated of late, and he'd call in on him, make sure he was okay. So I left it at that.
You weren't tempted to check this stuff out for yourself?
No. Well, actually, I did talk to a couple of people about whether I should sort of humour him, because I didn't think he was dangerous. Or at least I didn't get the sense that he meant me any harm. And I didn't want to just turn a blind eye if he was, having difficulties. But these colleagues of mine were pretty certain that indulging any of this was the wrong course of action.
After Eleanor spoke to the local vicar, the messages from Henry Akeley stopped for several months. Then she got this one, on the 9th of September.
Miss Peck, it's Henry Akeley here. I'm so sorry to have been pestering you these past few months. I do hope I didn't cause you any alarm. I'm afraid I was having some kind of mental health episode, but all is quite well now. As I say, I hope I didn't cause you any distress. Please, disregard whatever it was I was saying, and I'm very sorry to have been any trouble.
I got a call from the police about 3 days after that last message. Henry had a son. They were estranged, and the son lives in Austria. But the son's wife had passed away, and he had called Henry to let him know and hadn't been able to track him down. So he called the police and asked them to go round there.
According to the police report, the Akeley house looked like it hadn't been occupied for a couple of months. They found 2 of Henry Akeley's dogs running wild in the forest nearby, and the graves of several more in his back garden. They checked Henry's phone records, and that's how they came to call Eleanor Peck. To this date, there has been no sign of Henry Akeley, and the official investigation into his disappearance seems to be firmly on the back burner. So he disappeared before he left you that last message?
Apparently so.
Sorry, jumping back to that first letter, what happened on the 26th of December 1980? This thing that Akeley claims to have witnessed?
That's the Rendlesham incident, isn't it?
The what now?
The Rendlesham incident. It's like the British Roswell, a UFO sighting.
Okay. Is this an abductee story? Because that's really
For the record, I don't think Henry Akeley has been kidnapped by Martians. Look, he was a weird guy with some eccentric views on the world, and I think he may have had some kind of psychotic episode and just wandered off. But the police seem to have lost interest in him, and I didn't feel good just ignoring the situation, so I called you two. I figured the stuff Henry was into would interest you, and I thought if you wanted to dig into this a little bit, you might at least find out what happened to him. But if it's not your thing, I understand.
I don't know what our thing is anymore.
After the call with Eleanor, Kennedy and I went to the cafe across the road from the studio. This had long been our go-to place for talking through matters related to the show and the stories we're covering. We've got into the habit of recording those conversations because, well, we pretty much record everything.
I mean, before last year, we were just into true crime stuff, and that was fine. But can we go back to that after what happened with the whole Charles Dexter Ward thing?
I know what you mean. But do we really want to go the other way? We're a mystery podcast, but there's also the problem that because of what we got into last time, we're in danger of seeing every unsolved mystery as something spooky.
Right. And whether this is that or not, does it even have legs?
One of the pitfalls of making a podcast like this is that we work on a series basis. With any possible story, we have to make a judgment call at the start about whether we're going to dig up enough interesting material to provide a story that can run across multiple episodes. If a story peters out after a few days or even a few weeks, that's time and money we've spent without having anything we can use.
We don't want to run with this only to find Henry Akeley wandering around in the forest after a couple of weeks with his undies on his head and a syringe in his arm.
At least that would mean we know what happened to him. And I don't know that finding him is necessarily the end of it, if there's a good story to be told about what happened.
Okay, but we don't have any indication either way yet. And we come back to the problem of those messages. Because if they're anything other than the rantings of a crazy person, then we're back into woo-woo territory again.
I don't want to be the breadhead, but the woo-woo paid a lot of bills last year.
Says the half of the team who wasn't abducted and fed hallucinogenic drugs by homicidal cult members.
Yeah, I suspect that was a one-off.
It only needs to happen once for it to become a permanent factor in decision-making. Is this it?
Am I navigating? I thought you were following the sat-nav.
I was, but there's no signal out here.
Yeah, that could be it there. In the end, we decided to look into what happened to Henry Akeley. I don't think either of us really felt there was a story there, but an old man had gone missing, and finding him would at least be for the good. And we felt like we owed Eleanor Peck for her help last season. And even though we didn't think this would turn into anything, we recorded it just in case.
I'm standing in Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk. Looking due west from this spot, the forest extends for miles. If I turned southeast and walked in a straight line, I'd hit the Suffolk coast. You can smell the sea breeze here, and it mingles with the thicker, heavier air from the forest. In front of me, there's a single-lane road that I'd be willing to bet follows a track that's been here for hundreds of years. And on the other side of the road is a small, very old cottage with a tiled roof. It's pretty, but the garden that surrounds it is already overgrown and the house has the air of abandonment. This is, or was, the Henry Akeley house.
Shall we go in?
Yeah, you should explain how come I have the key, or people might think we're breaking into the place.
Okay, this isn't a show, but if it was, I can do that in the narration.
Not on location. This is reportage. Into the mic or it didn't happen?
Seriously?
Yep.
All right. Henry Akeley's son, the one who reported him missing, lives in Austria. We tracked him down. I spoke to him on the phone and explained who we are and what we do. I told him we might be interested in looking into his dad's disappearance, but we'd like to have a sniff around first, and so he sent me a key to the place.
See? That wasn't terrible. It doesn't need a soundproof room and music behind it, does it?
I distrust your low-tech ways.
So what do we think about this house? 1500s?
I'm not an expert, but that's probably a good guess. It was a very good guess. According to the parish records, the house was built in 1522.
That's the gate. The paint is peeling pretty badly and the hinges sound like they could use some oil.
You really do narrate everything, don't you?
That's why I'm so much fun to edit. Okay, this is interesting. You remember on one of those messages, Akeley said he had a camera installed? I think he means this.
That's one of those Wi-Fi doorbells.
Right. It detects movement and sends a video and audio to a smartphone.
Is it still working?
You mean is someone watching us right now? I don't know. I imagine if Henry still has his phone on him, the police would have used it to trace him.
Yeah, this lock could use some oil too.
This is cute.
Now, this is about 3 months worth of junk mail.
Anything useful?
I'll have a proper look before we go.
Okay, so we've walked into well, it's not really a hallway. The place opens out onto the right into a living room, and to the left into a kitchen with a stone floor. There's a wall ahead of us.
There probably would have been doors here back in the day.
Keep going.
What?
Carry on, say it.
Oh, yeah. Ahead of us, on the other side of the wall, is the chimney. So there's probably fireplaces. There are fireplaces in each of these rooms feeding into the main chimney. So there would have been doors here to keep the heat in.
Living room first?
Yep.
Okay, this is kind of what you'd expect. The carpet seems pretty old and worn, and there are dog hairs all over it. The sofa has a blanket on it that's presumably for the dogs. An old TV, no kind of media hardware. Bookshelves. History, folklore.
Yeah, I'm going to get some photos of the books. Eleanor Peck might be able to glean something from what he's been reading.
There's some more in a pile down there at the end of the sofa.
Yeah.
The smell in here is...
Doggy.
Yeah, wet dog. Stale, wet dog. And cigarettes. I see 3 ashtrays in this room alone, and they're all full of roll-up butts. Dust and ash and dog hair everywhere. Wow, this is, I want to go with traditional, in as much as I'm a child of the late 20th century and I have no idea how you prepare a meal in this place. Okay, and there's a smell that's quite unlike... Oh, that's what it is. There are some bowls of dog food over here by the back door, and this is what dog food smells like when it's... Oh, when it's been sitting around for... well, longer than it should. The kitchen is horrible. Did you hear that?
Hear what?
Come here.
What?
Listen.
What am I supposed to be hearing?
A voice from upstairs. It sounded like a kid.
Okay. The stairs are through here. Oh, what's that smell? Jesus. Hello? Hello, is anyone up there? Stay behind me.
Seriously? This is my gig. Is someone there? I don't think you're supposed to be here. This is the bedroom. It's...
I can't tell if it's been searched or if he's been burgled or it's just incredibly untidy.
Judging by the rest of the house, I'm going with self-inflicted. What is interesting, though, is that.
The suitcase?
Assuming a guy like Henry Akeley doesn't have a beautiful set of matching luggage, that would likely be his only suitcase. And it's here.
So he didn't pack, which means he wasn't planning on going anywhere.
Or he left in such a rush that he didn't have a chance. Maybe the Martians were in a hurry. Maybe UFOs charge waiting time. That's not a kid. It's a radio.
Shortwave. Henry was a radio ham. So, we were hearing interference. If there are kids out there somewhere on walkie-talkies or whatever...
Why does anyone bother when there's Skype?
Why do people use fountain pens or typewriters or collect vinyl?
All good questions. Okay, 1 second. We're in the second bedroom, which Henry Akeley has turned into, I guess you'd call it an office. The desk is mostly taken up with the shortwave radio setup, which, as you can hear, has been left on. The walls are covered with photographs and maps and newspaper clippings. It looks obsessive, but I'm not sure what the overall theme is yet. There are scraps of paper and notebooks scattered across the desk, and
It's all right. It's all right. It's just kids on walkie-talkies.
Well, they're scaring the shit out of me. If they're coming through this frequency, does that mean we can talk back to them?
Yeah, I guess so.
This button?
Thought you were technical.
In the 21st century, I'm technical.
This is the ghost of Henry Akeley.
Is that in good taste?
Okay, probably not.
Although I suppose that's how urban myths are born. Those kids are going to tell their mates they're out playing and...
What is it?
It's a piece on the Rendlesham incident.
Fine, I'll do the storytelling. Matthew is standing over by the far wall, looking at the clippings Henry Akeley has pinned up. He appears to be fixed on a particular story that looks like it's from a local paper. The headline is, "Local People Witness Alien Landing," and there's a photograph of 5 people of various ages. One of them is a young Henry Akeley who looks... Well, we know he was using drugs then, and I guess he looks like someone who's using a lot of drugs.
That's not who I'm looking at.
I don't know who that is.
You never met her. That's Amelia Fenner.
As in?
As in a member of Joseph Curwen's witch coven in the New Forest in the 60s.
The next 2 minutes of audio we recorded consist almost entirely of Kennedy Fisher swearing. When she eventually had to pause for breath, we went outside to get some air.
How is this possible?
I don't know. Maybe it's just a wild coincidence.
No.
It actually could be. Henry Akeley was into folklore and whatever else. We know Amelia Fenner left the New Forest Coven and went to Winchester, but I never asked her what she did after that. If this area is so steeped in all the stuff she was interested in, it's not out of the question that she came up here and crossed paths with Henry Akeley. And it has nothing to do with the whole Charles Dexter Ward thing.
If you haven't listened to the last series, some of this may seem confusing, so let me pause for a quick refresher. During our investigation of the case of Charles Dexter Ward, Eleanor Peck introduced me to Amelia Fenner, who was by then an old lady in a nursing home in Barnet. In her youth, Amelia had been a member of a witch coven in the New Forest run by a man called Joseph Curwen. Curwen claimed to be the reincarnation of an ancient Mesopotamian sorcerer called Ipku Aya. Amelia Fenner fell pregnant by Curwen, and the modern-day members of the Ipku Aya cult believe that Amelia's granddaughter, a woman called Melody Cartwright, is the new vessel for Ipku Aya's spirit. It was Melody Cartwright and some other members of that cult that Kennedy had pursued to Iraq when she had her scooter accident and lost the trail.
That's a good summing up. Although it glosses over the part where those same cult members drugged me and tried to kill me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be brief so I can cut back to your meltdown in the street.
That was not a meltdown. Since when do we believe in coincidences?
I'm just saying...
We should be running away from this thing as fast as we can.
If that's what you want to do.
Meaning you don't?
We're just here to see if this thing has legs.
Oh, it's got legs. It's got fucking tentacles.
2 people crossed paths nearly 40 years ago. For all we know, they only met when that photo was being taken.
But you want to find out?
I'm not going to pretend I'm not interested.
We're going back down this road again.
It's not the same road. It probably doesn't lead to the same place.
It all leads to the same place.
Fine. Then we won't... Kennedy? Kennedy, you okay? Take deep breaths. I've got some water in the car.
I think that's as much as we need of that. I had a panic attack. Let's not make a big deal of it. I went through some stuff last year, and then I wound up in an Iraqi hospital, and I guess a lot of it came flooding back when this Henry Akeley business seemed to connect up to all of that.
I think anyone would have had the same reaction.
Well, the point is you were right. We don't know what the connection between Akeley and Amelia Fenner is yet, but it is interesting, and it's exactly the kind of thing we dig into.
You did say that at the time.
Yeah, I did. Once I'd caught my breath and had some water. It was bright sunshine, the Suffolk countryside. It all kind of seemed to recede. Let's go back inside.
You sure?
If we're going to do this, let's do it right.
And so we went back. We stepped out of the bright sunshine and into the shadows of the Akeley house. I'm not going to pretend that since then there haven't been a lot of times where I wished we hadn't. We could have just got in the car and driven back to London and looked around for a different story. But that's not what happened. What we uncovered, what we're still uncovering, we don't know how this will turn out, is a mystery that has sent us deep into England's past, to an area steeped in witchcraft, the occult, secret government operations, and something that might indeed be altogether otherworldly. I'm Matthew Hayward.
And I'm Kennedy Fisher.
And this is The Whisperer in Darkness.
All right, that was episode 1. I'm more or less done here, so I'm going to turn this off and then we'll hop over to STEM work for episode 2. See you there. And we're back. I've miraculously had time to make myself a fresh coffee, pack the acorn, Tilbury this time, and I'm going to be over at the table to work on the stem for this print. As you can see, it's now 80% shaped, I would say. Pretty close. All right. Let me just get to the file. Here we go. Episode 2, Whisper in Darkness.
BBC Sounds, music, radio, podcasts.
Sunday the 5th of May 2019. It's about 8 o'clock, well actually 8:07 in the evening. Just getting dark. Well, they won't be coming for a while yet, if they come at all tonight. I won't know until I hear the dogs. They can smell them or sense them and they start growling and barking. I went back to the police today and once again they took down all the details and said they'd look into it, but they're humouring me. They think I'm soft in the head. They won't do anything. So I'm leaving this account of my own, and I'm doing it all on an old tape machine because nothing digital seems to survive proximity to my visitors. The only one I trust now is Wilmarth. All the others either think I'm mad or they know I'm not because they've been co-opted by these things. Walter Brown watches me every time I leave the house. I think he's been trying to get in at night with the others. And the broadcast is back. It switches frequency every few days, so someone must be manipulating it. I tried to play it to Wilmarth, but it wasn't broadcasting when he came round. I'm going to record it if it comes on again. I told the police about that as well, and they said they'd look into it, meaning that they'll do nothing. I suppose I should count myself lucky they haven't sent the men in white coats round. I'm going to feed the dogs and then secure the house for the night. This is Henry Akeley, May the 5th, over and out.
If you're just joining us, I recommend you go back to episode 1 of this series and start at the beginning. I'm not going to promise it will all make sense, but it might at least give you some context for what you just heard and what comes next. At the end of the last episode, Kennedy Fisher and I went back into Henry Akeley's house. Despite our misgivings about the circumstances of his disappearance and his apparent connection to Amelia Fenner, who was involved with the case of Charles Dexter Ward, which we covered in our last series, we decided to look into the Henry Akeley case in more detail. While I took photographs of everything pinned to the walls in Akeley's spare room, Kennedy was going through his desk.
Oh, wow.
What's that? Oh, wow. There were 16 small plastic audio tapes, the kind you used to use in a dictaphone or an old answering machine. The tapes weren't dated. Instead, they were simply numbered 1 to 16. Whatever device Henry Akeley used to record these tapes wasn't there. What you heard at the start of this episode was the first recording on the first of those tapes. This is the second recording.
I've just been woken up with the dogs, which means they're on their way. It's 2:17 in the morning, 5th of... the 6th of May. They're coming later than usual. Well, but there's a decent moon tonight, and the sky was clear earlier. Well, now it's clouded over, and... That's downstairs. I'm up in the spare bedroom. It's too dark to see anything. I put a proximity lamp out there last week, but they smashed it on the first time they came on. There's several of them. They're all around the house. Shit. They've got one of the dogs.
I'm Matthew Hayward, and this is The Whisperer in Darkness.
Hello?
Father Wilmarth.
No, not Catholic. Technically it's Reverend, but just call me Albert, albeit.
Albert Wilmarth is the vicar at the Church of the Holy Cross, which stands about 100 yards down the road from Henry Akeley's house. It's an ancient church with a partially thatched roof surrounded by a well-kept graveyard. The vicarage sits to the side of the graveyard, across an old stone wall. When Wilmarth opens the door, I'm a little taken aback because I was expecting an older man.
Yes, I'm too young to be an Albert, apparently. I'm named after my grandfather, who was born slap bang in the middle of peak Albert popularity. Sugar?
No, thank you. He's in his 40s, fit and healthy looking. He lives alone in this old house, and there's a sense here of an ordered mind, that everything is in its place. There's no clutter or mess. The room we're in is ostensibly the living room, but it has more of the feel of a library. 3 of the walls are lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves. The only thing that stands out, both as an item that doesn't belong in a library and something I wasn't expecting to see in a vicarage, is a 50-inch state-of-the-art television with a set of high-end home cinema speakers arranged around the room.
I'm a film and box set junkie, I'm afraid. It's my only real vice, although I suppose it all feeds in. You'd be surprised how many sermons you can get out of 8 seasons of Game of Thrones.
Albert Wilmarth has known Henry Akeley for the best part of 10 years. In his recordings, Akeley refers to Wilmarth as the only one I trust.
Henry was one of the first people I met when I moved here. I was out walking in the forest, trying to get a feel for the geography. Henry was out there with those bloody dogs of his. It's quite a disturbing experience the first time. This strange-looking character like Merlin or Gandalf or something, emerging from the trees with all these massive dogs roaming free. 2 of them came bounding up to me and nearly knocked me right over. I'm not a dog person, really. And these were big old things, Alsatians. And whatever claims Henry might have made about being able to control them, those dogs did whatever they wanted.
Wilmarth told me that Henry was out in the forest most days.
Conducting research, he said, when we first met, which I later came to understand as a kind of field investigation into the local folklore. And I suppose that's what connected us, because Henry certainly wasn't a Christian. I don't know that he ever set foot in the church outside the couple of times he might have poked his head around the door looking for me.
And you're interested in folklore too?
Yeah, well, I always have been. Myths and legends, you know. The Roger Lancelin Green books when I was a kid, and then Robert Graves, and then a kind of more localised interest in the British end of things. And then I moved here, and the local folk tales are so rich.
Really? I mean, this area specifically?
Oh, yeah. Just this few square miles is amazing once you start digging into it. Ghosts and witchcraft and mythical creatures. I think it's all baked into the history of the place and how long it's been populated. And then you have this dense, spooky forest so near to the coast, so you get this mix of rural and maritime stories that go back nearly 2,000 years.
Did Henry ever mention a woman called Amelia Fenner?
The witch? Yes. He talked about her quite a lot when I first knew him. She wasn't still here by then. I think she ended up in a home. She must be quite old by now.
She actually died last year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Did Henry say what she was doing up here?
Well, I think it was the folklore that brought her here too. The occult side of it. This area is a bit of a mecca for people like that. As I understand it, Miss Fenner had come up from the New Forest when the group she belonged to there had broken up and she was presumably looking for pastures new. I think she was something of a local curiosity when Henry was a boy, and then, well, as he tells it at least, he became interested in all this pagan stuff as a teenager. And at some point he fell in with Amelia Fenner and they started doing rituals and what have you.
So Henry was into witchcraft and the occult?
Well, I think it was a phase, really. I don't really know what he got up to with Amelia and whoever else she gathered around her back then. But I understand there was a lot of drug taking, and I know Henry had his own struggles with that. But by the time I came along, Henry's interest in witchcraft and the like was purely academic. I think that what happened with Amelia and the others in the forest had freaked him out.
Okay. What happened with Amelia Fenner in the forest?
Well, they call it the Rendlesham Forest Incident. Henry and Amelia were there when it happened.
At this point, it's probably worth getting an overview of this Rendlesham Forest Incident, so we all know what we're talking about.
In ufology circles, the Rendlesham Forest Incident is considered to be the British Roswell. It's one of the most famous, most credible, and longest-lasting UFO encounters we have.
Dean Perry is an American whose parents were stationed on various bases across Europe when he was a kid. He went to high school on those bases, and after graduating, he travelled extensively before settling back here in Suffolk. Dean now makes a living as a ufologist and has written extensively about the Rendlesham incident. I asked if he'd talk to us, but he went one better and offered to give me a guided tour of the area of Rendlesham Forest where the incident supposedly occurred.
So right here, on the other side of this chain-link fence, is a runway that was part of RAF Woodbridge. A couple of miles north of here is RAF Bentwaters. Neither base is open any longer, but in 1980, the height of the Cold War, both of these were U.S. Air Force bases, fully manned fighter jets, the whole works.
And you spent some time here in the 80s yourself?
Yeah, I was at high school for a couple of years here at RAF Woodbridge, yeah. I wasn't here in 1980, but my parents knew some of the guys who were. Where we're standing right now, this was the east gate of RAF Woodbridge. They called it the back gate.
There's a hut still there on the other side of that gate.
That's right, yeah, and this is where we start. Christmas Day, 1980. The guy standing watch in that hut is Airman First Class John Burroughs. It's the middle of the night. We're actually tipping over into the early hours of the 26th of December, when Burroughs spots some lights in the forest, over in that direction.
And that is what? That's east?
Yeah, about half a mile due east through the trees. He sees red and blue lights, and he doesn't know what he's looking at. Burroughs calls his boss, Staff Sergeant Bud Steffens. Steffens sees the lights too, and neither of them have seen anything like it before. So, they decide to take a jeep out along the perimeter to see what it is.
Dean walks me along a track that runs parallel to the base perimeter, and then we cross a single-lane public road, and that's where the forest begins again.
They stopped the jeep about here and confirmed that they're definitely seeing lights out there in amongst the trees. But the jeep can't get there because none of the tracks through the forest are wide enough at this point, and they're not okay with going it alone because this is the military, and so there are standard operating procedures and hierarchy and all that. So they turn around and head back to the base. A bunch of telephone calls are made and people are consulted all the way up the line, and the prevailing wisdom, there being no flights in or out of either of the bases on the night in question, is that this could be civilian. A light aircraft has come down in the forest. So this guy, Staff Sergeant James Peniston, who's the on-duty flight chief at Woodbridge that night, gets sent down to the east gate to check it all out. Peniston calls a guy called Chandler, who's the overall flight chief of both bases, and Chandler, in turn, checks in with two other local bases, Bawdsey and Watton, and with Heathrow Air Traffic Control. No one's heard anything about a light aircraft in trouble, but the radar did pick up a bogey 15 minutes earlier, a blip they couldn't identify, and it was moving across this area, and then they lost track of it right over RAF Woodbridge. So now, 4 of them head out in 2 jeeps. Once again, The jeeps aren't going any further than this road. So they park up and start walking down this track.
Dean leads me along a narrow track that runs through dense trees. The sound in the forest is very different. Those big Suffolk skies are gone instantly, and it all feels much more enclosed, claustrophobic.
So, about halfway along this path, the radios start to fail.
Say again, Delta 4?
All of the radios? Yeah. And these things work fine in forests, and for all four of them to fail at the same time. In his report, Peniston said they thought the signal was being jammed. Two of the guys decide to stay behind so they can keep in touch with the airbase. And Peniston and Burrows, the guy who originally spotted the lights, carry on down here. Up ahead, they see the lights again, much closer now. Peniston describes a kind of intense static charge in the air, and he said that moving forward became difficult, as if they were wading through deep water. He said it felt like they were moving in slow motion. As they get to this point, Peniston reports there was a blinding flash with no sound. They hit the dirt, but after the flash, there's nothing. So they get back up again. Peniston is looking through the trees right here, and he sees that.
The people who manage Rendlesham Forest have not been shy to take advantage of this bit of local folklore. What we're walking along is actually their designated UFO trail. And where Dean is now pointing, there is a small clearing, in the centre of which stands a sculpture of a black triangular craft with curved edges.
So, this sculpture is actually based on drawings Peniston and Burrows made after the event. It looks pretty innocuous now, but Peniston described it as bristling with lights, and he said the side of the craft was etched with some kind of strange hieroglyphics. Peniston takes a bunch of photographs of this thing, but the lab on the base says there was a fault and they didn't come out.
That all sounds a bit Oliver Stone.
Oh, that's an easy rabbit hole to disappear down once you get into the after-action reports being removed from the logs and classified top secret, people changing their accounts following debriefs with mysterious government officials and so on. But that's all after the fact. What's happening here, right now, is Peniston taking pictures, and at a certain point he says something to Burrows and gets no reply. So he looks back over his shoulder, and what he sees is this blinding white light shining vertically down on Burrows, and Burrows is just standing frozen in this light, not moving, completely unresponsive.
Okay.
And then Peniston steps forward towards the craft, which he said was just hovering a few inches off the ground, and he reaches out and touches the glyphs on the side of it. When he does that, he feels this flood of information hitting his brain, like he's somehow picking up some kind of signal broadcast.
What kind of information?
Ones and zeros, he says, binary, this incredibly fast stream of it. He freaks out and lets go. And then, the craft just rises up through the trees and flies away. Peniston and Burrows recover themselves and head back to the jeep to discover a panic going on, because it turns out they've been in the forest and out of radio contact for far longer than they thought. You might put it down to time flying when you're having fun, but it turned out that both of their watches had lost 45 minutes.
That's incredible.
No, what's incredible is that the UFO came back again 2 nights later.
That second visit saw the UFO witnessed by different US personnel. Chief amongst them, Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt. Holt was with a team of men at the original landing site on the night of the 27th of December. The team found broken branches on the trees surrounding the clearing, consistent with Peniston and Burrows' eyewitness accounts, evidence on the ground of some kind of craft having settled there, and alarmingly high radiation counts in the immediate vicinity. Holt himself recorded their findings on his dictaphone. Then just before 2 o'clock in the morning, one of the team spotted a light in the distance.
We're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmers' barnyard animals. They're just very, very active, making an awful lot of noise.
There's been a pigmentation.
You just saw a light where? Wait, no, slow down. Where?
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there. So there it is.
They followed the light to the edge of the forest, looking out across a farmer's field. The same field, incidentally, that Henry Akeley's house backs onto.
Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. It's still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow stare, a dark stare. It's like the pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. And the flash is so bright to the star scope that it almost burns your eye.
They continued to follow the object across the field.
Past the farmer's house and across into the next field. Now we have multiple sightings of up to 5 lights with a similar shape and all, but they seem to be steady now rather than a pulsating or glow with a red flash. 244, we're at the far side of the second farmer's field, and made sighting again about 110 degrees. This looks like it's clear out to the coast. It's right on the horizon. Moves about a bit and flashes from time to time. Still steady or red in color. Also, after negative readings in the center of the field, we're picking up slight readings, 4 or 5 clicks now on the meter. 305 at about 10 degrees horizon directly north. We've got 2 strange objects, half moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. That gets to be about 5 to 10 miles out, maybe less. The half moons have now turned into full circles. As though there was an eclipse or something there for a minute or 2. Yeah, we're both heading north. Okay, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Well, we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
I don't have any strong feelings either way on the subject of UFOs. I've just never given the subject much thought. But hearing that tape and understanding the nature of the people that witnessed this, professional United States Air Force personnel don't go in for pranks on this scale. They don't make things up for attention. At the point that a lieutenant colonel is out in that forest describing what he's seeing live, you have to accept that something was going on. But those Air Force personnel were not the only people in the forest that night.
I'm with Albert.
Albert's fine.
I'm with Albert Wilmarth in the field at the back of the Akeley house. So we have the house behind us, and across the field here, that's Rendlesham Forest?
That's right.
And Henry Akeley and Amelia Fenner were out here in this field on Christmas night on the 25th of December, 1980.
Yes, that's right. Henry and Amelia and several others were out here performing some kind of ritual.
And during the course of this ritual, the Rendlesham Forest incident happened. And that freaked Henry out?
I think it's more complicated than that. I think Henry believed that the Rendlesham incident was the result of the ritual.
They summoned aliens.
Well, Henry said he never believed the Rendlesham incident had anything to do with aliens.
Okay.
Now, I need to point out that I'm a bystander here. I'm the local vicar. I have an interest in folklore. That doesn't mean I believe in any of this stuff.
You don't believe in God?
Oh, God, yes, obviously, that's very much a job requirement, but it's a fine line that I have to walk. Do I believe that the Son of God was crucified to save mankind? Yes, I do believe that. I take that as a literal truth. So you might already say I'm credulous because I don't require proof for my beliefs. But that said, my interest in local folklore is not based on any kind of belief. You know, the tales of Old Shuck, for example.
Old Shuck being?
Well, it's a dog. It's sometimes called Black Shuck. Okay. It's a big black dog that has been sighted in this area for centuries. There's a church over in Blytheborough, Holy Trinity Church, and the door there still bears scorch marks that were supposedly made in 1577 when the devil took the form of Old Shuck, burst through those doors and killed 2 parishioners. Now, do I believe that literally happened? No, I don't. Despite believing in the devil, I don't think that happened. Do I think there's a chance that a rabid dog killed 2 people during a church service and that the legend grew from there? Well, that's a possibility, isn't it? And how that legend grows and weaves itself into the local narrative is interesting to me.
So you're saying something did happen here over Christmas in 1980?
Oh, I'm certain something happened. There are a lot of very credible witnesses from the US Air Force. I think they saw something. Was it aliens? I don't personally believe that. But nor do I believe it was angels or whatever Henry Akeley thought he and the others had summoned.
Okay, but Henry believed it.
Oh, I think so, yes.
And so his actions after that were informed
Well, that's what he was doing in the forest on the day I first met him. What he'd been doing ever since 1980, and what he continued to do right up until he disappeared. He was investigating. He believed there was something in those woods, that it had somehow been awoken by this ritual, and that he was therefore somehow responsible for laying it to rest again. And then, as we know later, he came to believe that he had been targeted by whatever it was, that it was after him in some way.
And what do you think?
Well, I like Henry. I mean, he's not an easy man to get along with, but I think that underneath the bluster and the bad temper, he's a good man. But Henry had a long history with drugs. He'd spent a lot of time with people like Amelia Fenner, and I think that had affected Henry's mind in a permanent way. I'm not a doctor, but if you're asking my opinion, I think Henry had been suffering from delusions for a while. I think they were getting worse, and I think ultimately they got the better of him. Wherever he is now, I would be surprised if he's still the Henry Akeley I first met a decade ago.
And he told you about his investigations, about these things that were supposedly trying to get into his house.
He did.
And you humoured him.
Why would you think I...
He said you were the only one he trusted.
I don't think I humoured him. Well, he would come to me and tell me these things, and I was aware that if I just flat out denied these beliefs he had, that he would stop coming to me. And he wasn't about to seek medical help. I hope that I didn't enable or reinforce anything. I didn't want him to be on his own. I thought if I could be his friend, then perhaps I could help.
But he never brought you any evidence of anything.
Well, how could he? There was no evidence.
He talked about a broadcast he wanted to play you.
Yes, something he was hearing on his shortwave radio. But every time I went round there...
Nothing.
I was either always... I just missed it, or it happened just after I left again. Just like the few times he asked me to stay up late with him to witness these visitors who would come to the house in the middle of the night.
They never came.
I don't know where Henry is, if he's alive or dead. But I think as far as what you're trying to do, to find a mystery here, the mystery is in the workings of the human mind. I don't think it's an external thing. This area has all this folklore, hellhounds and witches and mermaids, even aliens now. But you know what else it has a lot of? Insanity. The big skies, the open spaces, the harsh environment. People get lonely out here, and that can start to eat away at their mental health. If you want to know what happened to Henry, I think that's where the answer lies.
And you think that's the case?
Yeah. The Amelia Fenner connection was worth checking out, but I think Wilmarth was right. Henry might have been into witchcraft. I think he was more into drugs. But I think his disappearance is more to do with a mental state resulting from that lifestyle than witches or fucking Martians.
So you want to pull the plug?
Unless you've got anything?
Well, I've been working my way through Akeley's recordings. There's some weird stuff there, but I can definitely say that it's... it's as likely the diary of a man losing his grip on sanity as anything else.
Maybe that's interesting. Wilmarth was talking about this being a mystery of the mind. Does that have legs?
I don't know, maybe. People do disappear, don't they? Elderly people, especially if they're on their own. It doesn't really get much coverage. Maybe it is that. Use this one example of Henry Akeley as a way to open up a conversation about a wider thing.
I'd listen to that.
If you were subscribing to a mystery podcast, though, is that what you want to hear?
I don't know. Maybe I'm not the demographic.
Well, let's rustle up some millennials and do some audience research. Where are you now?
I'm back in Orford at the hotel. I want to pack up my stuff, get something to eat and head home.
All right. See you tomorrow. Have a think about this idea, though, the mystery of the mind thing.
I will. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, bye.
It's 10:17 p.m. I'm in the car. I'm heading back to London from Orford, and I just drove along the road where Henry Akeley's house is, and there's a light on. The upstairs light. I think the spare bedroom. And I think there's someone up there. I don't have any phone service here. And if I drive to somewhere where I might get some service, whoever it is could be gone when I get back. It may be that Henry's come home. I think we have the only other key. There's no cars parked anywhere, so... I'm not seeing any movement now, but I'm sure I saw a shadow move past the window as I was pulling over. Okay, here we go. It's pitch black out here. I don't know how anyone copes with living in the countryside. No wonder they all go crazy. Still no movement up there. Yeah, maybe we don't want to surprise the intruder by just walking in. Oh yeah, smart. Press the doorbell that connects to the missing guy's phone. That I was not expecting. The light has come on beneath the camera. Hello, Mr. Akeley? My name is Kennedy Fisher. Hello? You kids are creepy, you know that? Hello? Is anyone there? And now the light has gone off upstairs. There's definitely someone in there. Hello? Mr. Akeley? Let's get some lights on. No one down here? Hello? Is somebody up there? Unless you're Mr. Akeley, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be here. I've called the police and they're on their way right now. Empty. But the radio is back on. Well, if there was anyone here, they've gone. Someone was here. We definitely turned that radio off. But I can't see that anything else has been disturbed. But then it's not as if the place...
Kennedy getting herself into trouble again. She's a one. Alright, hope you enjoyed that. Yeah. It's taking a while to link up to the Lovecraft version of the story, but I think it's about to get there. If you're familiar with the Whisperer tale, things will start dovetailing shortly. But yeah, really nice vibe that they've set up there. All right, that's it for now. Till next week, take it easy. See you then.